Director of the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, Pandita Arthi Shanand ji, Mr. Rajesh Lakshman ji, Ms. Yudisha Balikaran ji, Mr. Sipiwem Chunu ji, Mr. Piyush Khandalwal ji, distinguished guests and online viewers, listeners, namaskar, and welcome to episode 4 of Aarshdhara. Aarshdhara is an interaction of today will be an interaction of the Atharvaveda, where Aarshdhara is an online series of interactions on scriptures composed by ancient sages of India. This program is in association with the Hindi Siksha Sangh of South Africa, and for that I would like to welcome Mr. Rajesh Lakshman, the CEO of Himani Radio, for this afternoon's introductory remarks. Namaste and welcome, Rajesh sir.
Namaste, and thank you very much for the introduction, Shristi ji. Dr. Yogi ji, Pandita Arthi Shanand ji, Yudisha ji, Shristi ji, Piyush ji, and Simphiwe ji. It is always a delight to be amongst you. This is a final installment of Aarshdhara, Atharvaveda. We trust those of us who've been following the program, you have enjoyed it. The idea is to unpack some of the series elements of the Vedas and have them presented to you in a way that you'd be able to understand, unpack it in a way that it becomes relevant for our daily life. So today's one, of course, is Atharvaveda. My own view is that Atharvaveda is sometimes the most misunderstood Vedas, especially among European scholars, largely because they fail to understand that, first of all, the Veda is not about a Veda of magic, but it allows people who are interested in the Atharvaveda to figure out a way in which how they could live their life and what kind of elements that help them to become one with nature and the various pujas and sanskaras that go along in making our lives fruitful. So we hope that today's session would help us to further understand this so that we come to a point where some of these doubts are cleared. So it is we are very privileged to have with us a luminary such as Pandita Arthi Shanand with us. And I'm sure at the end of the session, we're going to be much wiser. Namaste, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rajesh Lakshman, for those beautiful introductory remarks on episode 4 of Aarshdhara, where we depict the Atharvaveda. We would like to now welcome Pandita Arthi Shanand ji, who will be interacting with Ms. Yudisha Balikaran, who is a journalist and radio presenter. Just a brief background about Pandita ji. Pandita ji is a retired educator. She is a member of the Purohit Mandir Council and also currently the president of Arya Samaj South Africa. Namaste and welcome Pandita Arthi Shanand ji and Ms. Yudisha Balikaran ji for this 4th episode of Aarshdhara depicting the Atharvaveda.
My Prem Namaste, loving greetings to one and all of you. Thank you so much for that introduction, Shristi ji. It gives me great pleasure and honor to once again be part of the Aarshdhara series. And I would like to express my gratitude to the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center and the Hindi Shiksha Sangh of South Africa for allowing me this wonderful opportunity. Now, before proceeding with our interaction, just to quickly recap for our listeners as well as our viewers. Now, the Vedas are considered as the earliest literary records of Sanskrit literature and are believed to be the oldest holy books in Hinduism. There are 4 Vedas, the Rig Veda, which is considered the earliest form of Veda and throws light on matters of philosophical and religious importance. Then we have the Yajurveda, which is a compilation of procedures for ritual offerings and serves as a guidebook for priests to carry out religious ceremonies. The Samaveda is the principal root of traditional Indian music and dancing, which ranks as the oldest in the world. So for those of you who missed our discussions so far on the Vedas, you can log on to the ICCR in Durban Facebook page and watch the relevant videos there. Now, today we discuss the fourth and final text of the Vedic scriptures, the Atharvaveda. As Shristiji mentioned, we are very privileged to have with us Pandita Arthi Shanand of the Arya Samaj of South Africa, who will be enlightening us further. Pandita ji, my prem namaste to you, and how are you doing today?
Namaste, Yudhisha. Thank you very much for asking. I'm well, thank you. And namaste, Piyushji. Srishti ji, Sipiwa ji, and I believe Dr. Yogi ji is not on today, but my prem namaste to him as well. Thank you for having me on your series today, and I hope I'm going to do justice to it.
We are very excited to have you on board, Pandita ji, and very eager to learn a bit more about the Atharvaveda. Now, as Rajesh ji had mentioned during his introductory remarks, that especially amongst the Western civilization, the Atharvaveda is considered so-called, a book of magic. But I'm sure you are going to give us a bit more information about that and demyth that, so to speak. So can you kindly give a simple and brief introduction of the Atharvaveda for our viewers as well as our listeners?
Thank you. First of all, we need to ask ourselves, are the Vedas 3 or 4? Right? The Western scholars, basing their arguments on the Purusha Sukta and the word abhichara, which means sorcery and charms, have concluded that the Vedas are 3 and that the Atharvaveda does not belong to the main body as it deals with black magic. And this is as per the book on the Atharvaveda by Devi Chand. As the Atharvaveda is the fourth and the last in order of the Vedas, it is sometimes regarded by Western scholars as being of lesser importance in comparison to the other 3 Vedas, the Rig, Sama, and the Yajur. They based their assumptions on the content of some of the hymns that they felt were primitive and non-Aryan, as they were connected with charms and incantations. According to tradition, Atharvaveda is mainly a contribution of sages Atharvan and Angiras. However, an Indian writer of modern times, V.M. Apte, has a different view, and I quote, "The oldest name of Atharvaveda in Vedic literature is Atharva Angirasaha, that is, the Atharvans and the Angiras. The 2 words denote 2 different species of magic formulae. Atharvan is holy magic bringing happiness, and Angiras is hostile or black magic. Above all, the principal aim of the Atharvaveda is to appease the demons, to bless friends, and to curse, and as such, it did not find much favor with the priesthood. The view, however, led to Winterlet, another scholar, who in his book, History of Indian Literature, made this observation on the Atharvaveda. He said many of these magic songs, like the magic rites pertaining to them, belong to a sphere of conceptions which, spread over the sphere of the whole earth, recur with surprising similarity in most varying people of all countries. Among the Indians of North America, the Negro races of Africa, among tribes of Malaya and Mongol, among the ancient Greeks and Romans, and frequently still among the peasantry of the present-day Europe. As far as the subject matter of the Vedas and in particular the Atharvaveda is concerned, Indian scholars hold that the Vedas teach in short or in detail jnana, which is knowledge, karma, action, and upasana, devotion, yajna, sacrifice, yoga, union with the Supreme Being by means of contemplation, and sadhana, which is meditation, dharma, which is righteousness, artha, wealth, kama, desires, and moksha, salvation. There is nothing pertaining to human life, material or spiritual, which has not been referred to in the Vedas. Atharvaveda gives us the idea of modernity as the essence of the dynamics of life and existence. The ultimate reality is Sanatan, eternal. It is universal, original, and ever vital. It is constant in the essence and mutable in existence every moment. The Sanatan renews itself every moment, the same and yet not the same all the time, just as the day-night cycle, bright and dark, is the same as before and after, and yet it is new every morning in relation to time. Modernity is thus the latest manifestation of existence in relation to the past and obsolete in relation to the future, but poised ever in the present. And this has been stated in Kanda 10, Sukta 8 and verse 23 of the Atharvaveda, which goes this way. They say this Brahma is Sanatan, eternal, beyond time and age, and yet it arises ever anew in time and presence, as the day and night arise anew and follow each other in relation to the form and time of the occasion. And this is true in all fields of life, including dharma and values. Atharvaveda, as all the other three, asserts the unit of God. God is one. God is not 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10. All the manifestations of the one are called by different names. Atharvaveda begins with a prayer for the zest of life, and it celebrates the honey sweetness of life. When it says, let the winds blow honey sweet, let the oceans roll honey, let the rivers flow honey sweet, and so on. Atharvaveda celebrates the earth as one mother, home of humanity, and enjoins all to come and be her family. The Atharvaveda goes on to say that people in olden times attained achievements on this earth in whom the divine forces defeated the evil ones, the earth where the kine, the horses, the birds found their habitat. Let that earth grant us fortune and brilliance. Here, all the bounties are acknowledged with reverence and gratitude. This is what the Atharvaveda speaks about, this existence on this beautiful earth. Yudhisha, that's a brief introduction into the Atharvaveda.
Thank you so much for that, Pandita ji. So beautifully explained. Really, really very interesting. If you could please tell us, how is it considered? You have briefly touched on it in your introduction, but with regards to the Atharvaveda, how is it considered as an important scripture? Did you find any research or academic study about it?
It's considered an important scripture because it talks about life from birth to death. and everything in life that is social, economic, politics, medicine, governance, good governance, a parliament. It talks about kings, rulers, the way they should rule, and all of that. And that's what makes it such an important scripture. It is knowledge of the Prakriti, Mother Nature, as well as the Purusha, the soul or the cosmic soul. It covers the world of humanity, from the individual to the total collective personality of humanity, including the social structures, from the family, the community, and the nation, up to the United Nations. The Atharvaveda is important because it is the authority on the essence of existence. It talks of life from birth to death. It covers the aspects pertaining to the social, economical, political, spiritual, and medical spheres of life of a human being, including the respect and care for all beings. I hope that answers your question there, Yudhisha.
Absolutely. And so beautiful, encompassing all life forms, not just humanity, not just human beings. Really, really very good. Tell me, Pandita ji, what is special? What is unique? What is so interesting and enlightening in this ancient scripture? That's the Atharvaveda.
The fact that this ancient scripture, the Vedas, is pure communication of the original for all, is what makes this ancient scripture so special, unique, and enlightening. The Vedas are pure knowledge, right? There is no story, there's no history. It is free from local color and historical variations. Just as in science, there is no story, no history, and just as science is knowledge in the scientific language, so too the Vedas is knowledge in a scientific language. So whatever is in the Atharvaveda is the Veda. The very world of existence is Veda. The knowledge of the world of existence is Veda. And so to use that knowledge for the benefit of mankind, whilst protecting and preserving nature and the environment without hurting any form of life, that is Veda. The Rig Veda is the Veda of knowledge. The Yajur Veda is the Veda of karma. The Sam Veda is the Veda of bhakti. And the Atharva Veda is the Brahma Veda. It is the umbrella knowledge of existence, both concrete and abstract. The Atharva Veda is the knowledge of Prakriti, Mother Nature, of Purusha, the soul, the individual jiva, as well as the cosmic soul, which is Brahma. The Atharva Veda speaks of the prestige and respect of women. During the Vedic age in India, women held a position of equality with men. They were accorded a place of honor and dignity and enjoyed the respect of all. They were entitled to the study of all scriptures, thus elevating themselves to the position of rishi. And some of these female rishis were Lopamudra, Gargi, Maitreyi. In marriage, women were accorded the highest respect. The prosperity and joy of the family rested with the women. That's my answer to that question, Yudhisha.
Thank you very much for that, Pandita ji. Very, very interesting point that you bring up there about the equality of both genders, the equality of men and women. And somehow over time that had become quite distorted So, very, very important to go back to scripture, just
Yes.
to reiterate and reignite those qualities that came from that era, which brings me to my next question as to the relevance and the importance of the Atharvaveda. Of course, you've already highlighted one aspect, which is that of equality in both genders. But can you give us a bit more about the relevance and importance of the Atharvaveda in present day life, the modern context to it?
Okay, so some of the important themes, we first have to look at the themes of the Atharvaveda. And some of these important themes are on time. It's about time, right? Kal, as it's known, and time. By Kal does the wind blow. And this is said in the 19th Kanda, the 54th Sukta, and the second verse. By Kal does the wind blow. By Kal does the great earth move in balance. Both the great heaven and earth exist and subsist in Kal, which is time. It also goes on to look at themes such as karma, which is desire, Mother Earth, the human soul, birth and rebirth. It goes on to look at Yama and the mystery of the human being, Brahmacharya, which is the first stage of life. It then, after the first stage, it follows on to the Grihastha, which is about love and marriage and family life. And then it speaks of hospitality. Hospitality to all beings. It speaks of social organization and how social organization leads up to the building of a nation. It speaks of war and peace, of victory and freedom. Many other themes include health, age, cure of diseases, the sun, the moon, night and day, freedom from desire, freedom of speech, which we speak about now. When we talk of freedom of speech, it's in our constitution. And this was spoken of then in the Atharvaveda. It also speaks of elections and how to conduct elections. It speaks of the parliament. It speaks of dealing with evil, violence, sabotage, and enemies, and personal, familial, and social management. All of the above themes are an integral part of our everyday lives. Our day begins with prayer to that one God who is responsible for all things existing. In the context of our daily lives and in all modernity, we are reminded to conduct ourselves heroically and face and overcome the challenges and difficulties that we are confronted with every day. And on that point, I want to say, it's this spirituality within us that gives us the strength to confront those challenges. And that is why, especially women, when women are faced with challenges, they call upon that spiritual reservoir of theirs to give them that strength to overcome those challenges. The Atharvaveda speaks of international concord. May there be concord amongst our own people and concord with people of other countries. If you look at Palestine and Israel today, it's so relevant. It's a reminder when we go into the Atharvaveda and we look at the seventh Kanda, the 52nd Sukta of that Kanda, and the first verse, which says, "May we unite in our minds, unite in our purposes, and not fight against the divine spirit within us. And may not the battle cry arise amidst many lying wounded." That is so relevant today when we look into the situation that we have. And it also goes on to tell us about how we should be handling these situations. So if we go into an in-depth study of the Atharvaveda, we will come out more capable of handling situations that are currently existing today. Because when we speak of Atharvaveda or any Ved, we speak of it as an ancient piece of work. We sometimes do not see that it's still relevant today. So when we look at all those themes that come out of the Atharvaveda, we can see that we can apply it to every facet of life today. Yudhisha?
I find that so intriguing, especially when you speak about, besides it being a guideline for everyday living, but when you spoke about it also being a guideline for Parliament, Parliament speaks about elections and voting and governance of a country. That to me is very, very intriguing. The fact that it existed in our ancient scriptures, probably something that I think countries should look at, going forward, looking at it as a governance.
And Yudhisha, we are heading for our local government elections soon. And it's my fervent hope that when people vote, they look at the character of the person who's standing for elections. And they've got to understand that this man is the voice of the people in Parliament. And he's got to have that virtuous character. He's got to have a strong character. He's got to be true to himself and to our Creator before he even opens his mouth to make a statement. That's why it's so relevant today to know that we have to do this.
No, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Maybe we should actually get you to speak before the elections, to educate people and to guide them as to making the correct and intelligent choices.
Absolutely.
I think that would be a greatest part of the election campaign. Pandita Ji, tell me, would you like to quote or mention some verses from the Atharvaveda as an important message or guidance for our present life, especially for our youth?
Okay. Right, let's see. First of all, we've got to look at the life of an individual. According to the Vedas, our life is divided into 4 stages, right? The brahmacharya, the grihastha, the vanprastha, and the sannyas. The purpose of this is so that an individual is able to realize the 4 objectives, the purusharthas of life. And these are dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. And these are dedicated to each stage in life. This is the beauty of the teachings of the Vedas, and in particular the Atharvaveda. Sorry about that, Rajesh, I left his phone here. People are inclined to leading a life of pleasure to fulfill the needs of the senses and sense organs. This urge to satisfy the senses and live a disciplined life is inculcated during the stage of the brahmacharya, and this is especially for our young generation. All right? He or she devotes this time in their lives to attaining knowledge through austerity and discipline. And that is how, if you look at our successful matriculants who come out every year with such flying colors, it's because they have been doing this tapasya. And they have been dedicating their lives and their time to their work and their studies, and they've been disciplining their times, right? So the brahmacharya sukta of the Atharvaveda enforces an approach to bring these enjoyment of sensual pleasures under control. The following mantra brings out this approach as follows. Brahmacharish Anancharati rodasi ubhe tasmin devaha samanaso bhavanti sadadhara prithivim divam cha sa acharyam tapasapi parti. And this is what the mantra is saying. A well-disciplined student has a growing desire to acquire worldly and spiritual knowledge and strives in that direction. All his senses remain under his control, and he is well balanced. He then seeks knowledge of the world and the heavenly regions. By disciplining himself, he learns to respect his guru and receives his attention and guidance. And this message brings us to the point where we have student unrest today. We have burning of universities and books and property that is really so important in the life of a young person. So we've got to learn to respect our rishis, our gurus, our teachers, and our institutions of knowledge. Right? And then we come to good governance, which we just spoke about. In the Brahma Gavi Sukta, in Kanda 5, Sukta 18, we are introduced to freedom of speech and good governance. This is relevant today as most countries, including ours, struggle to overcome suppression and oppression, in spite of our country being a democracy. The Atharvaveda stresses the importance of freedom of speech as an essential of democratic rule. A ruler who listens to the voice of his people has their interests at heart, and if he is concerned with only his welfare, he suppresses the voices of the people. We say this is from the Gavi Sukta. Gavi is from the root gau in classical Sanskrit and means cow. Gau means cow, right? In Vedic Sanskrit, it means earth, it means speech, the rays of the sun, organs, and cow. In this sukta, Gavi means speech. The essence of the entire sukta is as follows. O king, do not suppress the voice of the learned leaders. You must also not kill them. By so doing, there will be disaster, as the suppression of speech of leaders will destroy the nation. The mantra is as follows. Naitam te deva adadustubhyam nripate attave ma brahmanasya rajanya gam jighatso anatyam. That is that one mantra from the Gavi Sukta. And then we go to the Prithvi Sukta, which is on Mother Earth. And we look at Kanda 12, Sukta 1. It says today, and I'm speaking now because of the pandemic, people are being made aware of the ill treatment of our Mother Earth, which is a God-given gift to us. He put us on this earth, and he expects us to live as one big family, living off the bounties of the earth and without borders and boundaries. What did we do? We erected borders and boundaries and laid claim to the land and the resources found on it, not giving any consideration to other beings, driving them away from their habitat. The Atharvaveda speaks of the health of the body and mind. In the very first kand, it goes on to address the vital element, water. And in Sukta 5 of the first kand, it extols the blessings of water. Om apohishtha mayopavasta na urje dadhatana maheranaya chakshase. It says apaha, the liquid energies of nature. You are creators and givers of peace and joy. Pray, inspire us for the achievement of food and energy for body, mind, and soul, so that we may realize and enjoy the mighty splendor of divinity within and without. Om Yovaha Shivatamo Rasastasya Bhajayate Hanaha Ushatir Eva Mataraha. Let us share here itself in body that nectar sweet of yours, which is most blissful. Pray, nourish us as living mothers feed their children. And then it goes on to say, Om Shanno Devir Abhishtaya Apo Bhavantu Pitaye Shanyor Abhisravantu Naha. May the divine waters be for our peace and bliss of our cherished desire, and bring us showers of peace, protection, and blessedness, with freedom from ill health and disease. So, we have noticed in our country especially that there are thousands of people who do without water. Plain and simple drinking water, water for their ablutions, water to have a bath with. They don't have that most essential element. And this is what our mantras are saying, that it is such an essential element. And that's something else we need to take to the government, that we need to have everybody have a good supply of water. It's so important. The Atharvaveda goes on to speak of the elimination of negativity. It even speaks of an easy delivery of a baby. Our lives should be lived with sweetness in thought, word, and deed. Each country has become a political unit delineated by these imaginary boundaries. These boundaries gave rise to the concept of my country. Then began the conflicting interests, which resulted in strife and war in the world. This was not how the Vedic seers envisaged nations. They believed that this earth is the mother, and all people living on it as one big nation, Vasudeva Kutumbakam. This was what was recorded in the Prithvi Sukta of the Atharvaveda in Kanda 12, Sukta 1, verse 12. Mata bhumihi putro aham prithviya. This earth is my mother, and I am the son of this earth. In another stanza from the same Sukta, 12, Sukta 1 and verse 45, the mantra states, Janam bibhrati bahudha vivachasam nana dharmanam prithvi yathan prithvi yathoksham sahasram dhara dravinasya me duham druveva dhenur apuharanti. This earth is my house, in which dwell people who speak innumerable languages, belong to various cultures, believe in different religions, and conform to different ideologies. It enjoins those people to live as one family on this earth, and entreats Mother Earth to sustain all its people. And then the Atharvaveda speaks of the concept of family life, which is the Grihastha Dharma. The family unit and parenting forms an important aspect. Children thrive in a home filled with love, trust, and respect. The Atharvaveda is the authority verifying this statement when it says in its mantra in Kanda 3, Sukta 30 and verse 1, Om Sahridayam Sham Manasyam Mavidesham Krinonavaha Anyo Anyam Abhiharyata Vatsam Jatam Iva Agneha. O family members, may you live in harmony and united together. May your minds think alike, so that there is no animosity amongst you. Just as the cow runs after the newborn calf with love, In the same way, treat each other with love and consideration. I hope, Yudhisha, I have covered most of the aspects of the Atharvaveda with those few mantras that I quoted, and I hope they are also as much relevant today as they were then.
Absolutely, Pandita ji, you brought up such wonderful, important points there by reciting those verses. And firstly, I must say, such a melodious rendition of those verses. Really, I could just carry on listening to you reciting. It's so beautiful, you know, Sanskrit is so beautiful. You just want to continue listening to it. So I really did enjoy the rendition that you had just given to us. 2 points which I, absolutely just want to reiterate that you've brought up. The first one, allowing the voices of the learned to be heard. I think that is something that's so important and so relevant, absolutely relevant in this day and age, where often many are stifled rather than allowed to grow.
Yes.
Absolutely. And the other point about the world belonging to every living being, both mankind as well as the animal kingdom. And so important in this day and age with regards to, war and fighting taking place between not just countries, but cities, regions, and so forth. If you look at what's happening between Israel and Palestine, how relevant is what you've just brought up to that situation? So absolutely wonderful there, Pandita. Thank you so much for highlighting those important points. Pandita, you tell us, how does the Atharvaveda as a scripture, it represents ancient Indian knowledge. How is this universally applicable to all human beings or to the whole of creation at large?
Yudhisha, we have discussed that the Veda is knowledge. This is what we obtain from reading and studying the Vedas. The same applies to the Atharvaveda, which, like the other three Vedas, represent ancient Indian knowledge. The crucial ingredient for progress and prosperity is knowledge, right? That very same knowledge can make people selfish and breed latent antagonism and resentment among them. This kind of knowledge is therefore not good for the progress of family and society. Today, advanced scientific knowledge and highly developed technology is misused in that we have manufacture of weapons intended to kill and destroy lives and creation. On the other hand, even with all this advanced knowledge, when productivity is increased 1,000-fold, there are millions of people who suffer from a lack of basic necessities of life: food, drink, clothing, shelter, and their dignity, which is so important. People are robbed of their dignity all the time. The fundamental reason for this is that the advanced knowledge of today is based on materialistic pursuits and for the advancement of the individual and not the society at large. Without religious and spiritual knowledge of the Vedas and the Atharvaveda in particular, that enriches both the mind and soul, the envisaged peace, happiness, and harmony in the world will remain an illusion. And that is why we say this ancient Indian knowledge is so applicable today. We have to keep stressing on that. We have to bring it to the attention of our younger generation who are coming up. They've got to know that they've got to continue with this and perpetuate it for their future generations.
Listening to you, Pandita ji, as well as listening to all the our other speakers on the 3 other Vedas as well, the Rig, Yajur, the Samaveda, it I was just thinking as you were speaking, this really is the guideline for everybody, for everyday life.
Yes.
And so important for us, especially the younger generation, to go back to our roots, find a guru, a teacher that can highlight, the core of each Veda so that it can help us to give us a guideline as to how to live our lives to its fullest potential. Pandita ji, a personal question. Did you find any difficulty in studying and understanding the Atharvaveda as a scholar, during your studies? Did you find any challenges while studying the Atharvaveda?
Yes, most definitely. First of all, my challenge was Sanskrit. I had never studied Sanskrit. I studied Hindi, right? But because of my study of Hindi, it gave me an understanding of the words in Sanskrit, except that there are a lot of exceptions. In Sanskrit, you'll get a word that ends with a na, and in Hindi, if we say havan, it's havan, H-A-W-A-N or H-A-V-A-N. In Sanskrit, it'll be H-A-V-A-N-A, right? It's got to be a full na. Okay, so that was my first problem that I had, but I got used to it. And then I didn't know enough of Sanskrit to understand the text, right? Which made it more difficult, because when you read interpretations of the Vedas, there are various interpretations, both by Western and Indian scholars, all right? And all of them are not saying the same thing. So that I felt was the most difficult thing for me to understand. For instance, I'll give you an example. While I was studying it, I tried as much as possible to follow the interpretations of Swami Dayanand and the Arya Samaj, which was of the Arsh tradition. So it was acceptable and quite clear. But then you had scholars who actually denigrated the mantras. There was this denigration of the mantras. For instance, there was a mantra in Kanda 7, Sutta 107, verse 1. And this mantra, when it was translated by W.D. Whitney, which was edited and revised by K.L. Joshi, as follows, right? It spoke of the mantra said, Namaskritya Dyava Prithivibhyam Antarikshaya Mrityave Mekshami Urdhvas Tishtanma Mahinsish Harisvaraha. And Whitney's interpretation of this mantra was, having paid homage to heaven and earth, to the atmosphere, to death, I will urinate standing erect. Let not the Lord's Ishvara harm me. Now, Dr. Tulsi Ram, in his publication of the Atharvaveda, translated the same mantra as follows. Having done homage to heaven and earth and to the middle regions, and having acknowledged the fact of death as the inevitable counterpart of life under God's dispensation, now, standing high, I watch the world and go forward with showers of the cloud. Let no powers of earthly nature hurt and violate me. And these two different interpretations arose from one verb only, and that verb was mekshami. Mekshami from the root mi, which means to shower. But the Western scholar took it as urination. And Dr. Tulsi Ram, who wrote the Vedas later on, took it as showers of rain, right? So it is the translator's sense and attitude to sacred writings which determines how the message is received and communicated in an interfaith context. So these were some of the difficulties that I came across, but there are many other difficulties, and it's once you start studying them, and if you're going to sit and look at all the various interpretations, you're going to definitely come up with problems, which hopefully we can put right one day, I hope.
Pandita ji, listening to you, I have a question of my own, where I want to study the Vedas, but I don't know where to start. As you said, I'm a Hindi scholar, so I'm studying Hindi at the moment. But as you mentioned, it is in Sanskrit, written in Sanskrit. So you've got to find a guru or a school that can teach you accordingly. What would you recommend, and especially the fact that there are different commentaries written about the Vedas, and one can get very confused if the commentary isn't as per what the Veda is denoting. What would you recommend? Somebody such as myself who's interested in studying the Vedas, what would you recommend I do?
Yudhisha, I think you would have to study Sanskrit so that you have a good basic knowledge of Sanskrit. And when you're reading these interpretations, you go back to what you've studied and give it your best interpretation. But then on the same topic now, I'm going to pose a question to the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center. Can the Cultural Center bring down learned scholars from India to start studies of the Vedas here? Because we don't have anyone here. We have Sanskrit teachers, yes, we have a lot of people who teach Sanskrit and Hindi and everything else. But what I'm talking about is bringing down Rishi Kumars from the ashrams, from the Gurukulas, who can come here and teach us on how to recite the Vedas properly in the first place. What I recited now wasn't the proper recitation of the Vedas. Okay, it's my recitation. But they need to teach us how to recite properly. They need to teach us how to interpret properly. And also start off a very good school of Sanskrit. That's what we need. Other Western countries are doing it. Why can't we start it here? Okay.
Brilliant suggestion, Pandita ji, and I'm sure the Cultural Center will take it into account. Going on with the interview, how did you get inspiration or motivation to study the Atharvaveda?
It started off not just studying the Atharvaveda, it started off with basic mantras from our Aryan Upasana book. Okay? So when I got into studies to become a priest, I was introduced to a lot of mantras. And as we looked at the breakdown of the mantras and the interpretations, and as we looked at which Veda it came from, it made me want to read up that Veda. So that was my inspiration. But also, my inspiration was listening to those scholars who came from India many years ago, listening to people like Swami Satyaprakash, Swami Dikshanandji, Swami Agnivesh now recently, and Swami Aryavesh, and all the other Swamis who came and who recited these mantras pat off. And they were so fluent, and the explanation was so wonderful. We had our own Pandit Nardevji, who really started off, this whole thing and inspired me. And then when my mom became his student, and she eventually became a priest of the Rohit Mandal, that also inspired me. And I'm still being inspired. I now listen to Dr. Rambilas, who is so good. And we have our sessions every week, and I'm learning a lot. I'm still learning.
Absolutely. I think learning for us all never ends. Am I right, Pandita ji?
Yes.
Okay, tell us, how important is it to study the Atharvaveda for us common people, especially the younger generation?
I've outlined that the Atharvaveda deals with life from birth to death, right? It is actually our signposts of life, like we have our 16 sanskars. Everything in the Atharvaveda points to the righteous way of living. And I think it's so important for our youngsters to know that. Because if you look around you today, I don't really know a lot of youngsters and the lives they lead. But just reading about them, reading about youngsters who are doing drugs, youngsters who are being killed in accidents because of recklessness and drunken driving and things like that. If they start reading the text in a simple form, we're not asking them to learn mantras. We need to put this into a simple form just for them to understand what life is all about and what the ultimate goal of life is and how the 4 stages and the 4 objectives of life lead up to that ultimate goal of life. That is how it should be. And I'm hoping we can get more youngsters. They don't have to belong to any particular group or faith or anything like that. They just need to be taught, because the Vedas is not for any one single person or group. It's for everybody.
I really like the points that you've brought up, making the Vedas simple so that the youth, as well as everybody, who does not understand Sanskrit, but when we make it simpler for them to understand, it becomes something that they want to learn, they want to imbibe in their everyday lives.
Yes.
So I think that's something that the organizations here in South Africa should seriously look at and take forward. Pandita ji, thank you so much for your input on the Atharvaveda. Certainly, you have put that myth to bed that it's the book of magic, because having listened to you, it certainly is a guideline for everyday life. Very, very interesting, very enlightening, and thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you, Yudhisha. Thank you, the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center, Srishti ji, Piyush ji, and Sipiwe ji. Thank you very much for having me on your program. Namaste.
Thank you so much, Pandita Arthi Shanand ji and Ms. Yudhisha Balikaran ji, for that very interesting insight on Atharvaveda on this episode of Aarshdhara. Yes, that was episode 4 of Aarshdhara. We've come to a close of this program, and I would like to invite Mr. Sipiwe Mchunu from the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban to render this evening's vote of thanks.
Namaskar, greeting to all of you. On behalf of Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center at the Consulate General of India in Durban, I am so honored today to deliver a vote of thanks on our 4th episode of the program, Aarshdhara. This is an online series of interaction on scriptures composed by the ancient sages of India. Today's interactions were about the Atharvaveda. Allow me to thank our online guests who took part on today's program: Sri Rajesh Lakshmanji, COO of Hindivani Radio; Pandita Arthi Shanand, retired educator and a priest; and lastly, Miss Yudhisha Balikaran, journalist and a radio presenter. We had a wonderful discussion today on Atharvaveda by Pandita Arthi Shanand. Many, it was so interesting, and it is clear now that all the Vedas are for the human race. To all of you, I'd like to say, Dhanyavad, thank you very much. To Director of Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center in Durban, Dr. Chaitanya Prakash Yogi, Sriti Harinarayan, Sri Piyush Khandelwal, thank you very much for taking part on today's program. To all our online viewers, I'd like to say thank you very much for taking part on today's program. You are kindly advised to visit SVCC Facebook page so that you will be updated about all cultural activities organized by Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center in Durban. Once again, Sri Rajesh Lakshmanji, Pandita Arthi Shanand and Yudhisha Balikaran. Thank you very much for taking part on today's program. To all of you, have a wonderful evening. Namaskar.